Hi and welcome to the film Stooges. Today we're joined by Barry Purves. He's an Oscar and BAFTA nominated animator slash filmmaker. He's worked on TV shows such as Twirlywoos, Rupert Bear, The Wind in the Willows and Postman Pat. He's also worked on multiple feature films such as The Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, King Kong and Mars Attacks. Today we're going to be talking about all that, plus his new short film No Ordinary Joe, the history of animation and where animation's going. So, what we're waiting for? Let's jump straight in. So, welcome Barry. How are you today?
I'm great. It's lovely to be here in the Everyman Cinema. Very comfortable seats. It's lovely.
I know. It's
good
one
coffee.
Of my favourite places.
Good films, good coffee.
And who are we joined with here?
This is Lord Todd Wadley, who is the co-star of my last film, which was called No Ordinary Joe. And he's animated. And in the film, he mixes with Lindsay, Duncan, an actress, the actress. And it's about their relationship together. But he's having a day out and he's dressed up for the occasion.
Great. Well, tell us more about this, because I know I've seen the film. It's really good. What made you come up with the idea to do a film about them?
I love eccentrics.
Right.
And I love the fact that such characters as Lord Todd, like Mary Poppins, like Peter Pan, they're a catalyst to learn about the other characters. And these sort of catalysts are always slightly supernatural. In Mary Poppins, we don't know where she comes from, but her role is to come and heal a family. And then when she's healed, she goes off again. And Lord Todd in our film is basically letting the actress open up and talk about their life and reevaluate their life. And but was he there? Was he there? He was a real puppet.
Yes.
The story is Joe Carstairs was this rather colourful, flamboyant, rampant lesbian who had many, many affairs with many, many women, famous and otherwise. But her one true love was this puppet. And what I love about such figures is they're there to make sense of our lives. And in this film, she's making sense of her life, as Mary Poppins makes sense of the Banks' life, and Peter Pan makes sense of the Darling's life.
Okay.
And in most dramas, there is this sort of strange character, like Tootsie or Mrs. Doubtfire, who doesn't really exist. They're the honest thing.
Right.
They're the absolute honesty, and they can say what nobody else can say, and they can see what nobody else can see. In Shakespeare, we're talking about Shakespeare already, King Lear, he has the fool, and King Lear makes some terrible mistakes, and the fool tells him so. And once King Lear has learnt, the fool disappears. He's gone. So all these sort of devices are there to make sense of the main character's life, to let them see and learn. And our short film was, well, animation actually is this artificial device that we can make sense of our lives through putting it in a metaphor.
So that was the question I was going to ask you. What is animation? Like,
Yeah.
if someone was out watching now that didn't know anything about animation, how would you describe animation?
Well, probably getting a little deep, but I would say animation is a metaphor. It's artifice that celebrates the truth. Okay, here we go. I'm going to talk Oscar Wilde. Man is seldom himself when he speaks in his own voice, but give a man a mask and he will speak the truth. I think I just bastardized Oscar Wilde there, but along those lines, somehow the artifice lets us see the truth. And animation, which is full of metaphors and all sorts of things, talks about real things. It gets rid of the clutter of everyday life and goes straight to the point. And I think the joy of animation and filmmaking, theatre, is you can use all these metaphors. You can use colour to tell the story, you can use music to tell the story, sound to tell the story, or a technique like stop motion to tell the story. And I think it's about finding this sort of artifice that speaks the truth.
Yeah.
I don't think the literal has any place in art.
Okay.
Well, it isn't. Even if we look at the most big blockbuster film or the most hardest documentary, decisions are still made. There's still a construct. It still starts at a certain time. It finishes at a certain time. There is artifice in everything. And I think what people love is they love being aware of the technique. Kenneth Branagh is Poirot. It gives the game away. You know, it's already, it's a game. It's a game. It's a play. And I think if you go to art galleries, there's this dance the public do. They go up to the painting, look at it, see the brush strokes, then they walk back, and suddenly the brush strokes become something else. So what I love about animation is the best animation, you're always aware of that it's a puppet or a lump of plasticine. You know, when you look at Morph or Wallace and Gromit, you are always aware that they are plasticine. And that's part of the charm.
You claimed my daughter's own. My voice will not be silenced. Are you out of your mind now to come here raving about?
So do you feel with animation, storytelling is very easy to do, or would you say it's actually harder?
I think, Patrick, it's making everything contribute.
Okay.
Especially with short films, which I seem to have been doing all my life, is you can't waste any time.
Yeah.
Every frame has to count. And probably I'm guilty of making quite dense films where I demand that the audience concentrate, and I'm not going to apologize for that. I don't make animated wallpaper just because you have the luxury of controlling every frame. Let it be part of the story.
Yes.
And, you know, sometimes the scene setting in a live action feature film, you can be a bit more languid and have a lovely shot of a country house and then carriage arriving and everything. In short films, you have to get on with it. And I tend to use mise-en-scène sort of images behind the characters to echo what they're feeling, or I use colour to what would have taken longer in live action to explain. I tend to use all the elements to get on with it.
No, I understand that.
Yeah.
I mean, if we take a step back before we talk about your short films, I mean, at the start of your career, you started in Cosgrove Hall.
Yeah.
Which was a very iconic studio in Manchester. I mean, what was that like? You know, obviously.
I tell you what it was like. It was exciting because they were sort of making it up at the same time.
Right.
I was there at the very beginning with a series called Chorlton the Wheelies, made in Chorlton cum Hardy. And Chorlton was a happiness dragon. And the Wheelies, they were asked to make a very dynamic TV series. One of the hardest things to do is walking characters. So they came up with the idea basically of heads on wheels, and you can just push a puppet and get a lot of footage out very quickly. But that was good. It developed a very dynamic style. And they were thinking, how can they get a really action-packed series? And they had a wicked witch called Fenella, who people of a certain age have fantasies about. She was a Welsh wicked witch. And as I say, walking her from there to there would take a long time. Why didn't she just disappear in the ground and disappear up there? And we developed this sort of trademark that she popped into the ground and popped up there, and it saved a lot of time, but became quite a visual, exciting thing. So we were trying to find ways to get the best possible programs economically, and we were making it up at the time. One of our early successes was the Pied Piper of Hamline, which was a pretty epic piece of storytelling. It was a half-hour Christmas special for Thames Telly. Thousands of rats, the wonderful Robert Hardy doing a very sonorous reading of the voice, and very medieval, very spectacular, a lot of characters, the Pied Piper taking all these children away. But he didn't speak, and his face didn't change. And Cosgrove Hall, Mark Hall and Brian Cosgrove wanted to go into lip sync.
Right.
And they came up with the idea of Wind in the Willows.
Very iconic series.
Very iconic. It was an absolute joy to work on. But all the characters had fully articulated lip sync. And we had the voices of Michael Hordern, Richard Pearson, Ian Carmichael, Eunice Stubbs, Beryl Reid, and David Jason as Toad. And what was lovely was Toad's vocal performance was so erratic and dynamic and full of splutters and coughs and wheezes and everything. And as the animator of Toad, that was a joy to work with. Giving a puppet a cough and a splutter brings the character to life. And they were masterly voices, wonderful voices. And suddenly we were doing full lip sync, and the puppet makers, Peter Saunders, they were developing the technology to do lip sync and putting real movement in the puppets. So we were developing the film techniques, we were developing the stop motion techniques. So it was all symbiotic, working side by side.
So obviously you're saying about the Wind in the Willows there, and obviously you've worked on a lot of TV shows with animation, Postman Pat, Bob the Builder, Rupert Bear.
Rupert Bear, the Twirlywoos was a lovely one.
With all these different shows you've done over the years and things like that, how would you say animation's evolved from when you first started to, say, present day now? Like, obviously you were talking about lip sync there. Obviously, originally, I guess there was no lip sync.
No, I tell you the big change, which students today can't quite appreciate, is we did it blind at the beginning.
Yeah.
Like Ray Harryhausen and animating Jason the Argonauts, he was doing it blind. He couldn't tell what his animation was like.
Right.
Today, students have video assist, and you can touch the puppet to a different position, and you can play back and check and check and check. In Wind in the Willows days, and I don't want to sound like an old fogey, but in those days, we did it by instinct.
Because it was on film.
It was on film. You couldn't tell what the performance was like. You had to trust your instinct that how big a move was right. And that's a very different sort of acting. It's very different. We could get more footage out today. I think, unbelievably, on Wind in the Willows, we were shooting something like 23 seconds a day, which is phenomenal. The big difference is you went for it.
Yeah.
You did your homework, you knew the characters, and you moved the character as you thought. Today, video assist gives better finesse to the animation, but it does make you... It's a bit like having a safety net on a high wire.
Right.
Maybe you don't take the risks, or
do you?
Well, there's the feeling you could always do it again.
Right. So, well, I mean, you were saying the Wind in the Willow days, you were getting 23 seconds a day.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. That's extraordinary.
Yeah. So, like, compared to, like, say, your last short now, how many seconds were you getting a day?
Well, it's all down to budget. Lord Todd, we had to do about 10 seconds a day.
Right.
And that was probably about 3 hours of animation because of the he was placed in a live action setting and the setting up the camera and the technology. But probably on the feature films like Coraline, each animator was probably scheduled to do 1 second a day, 2 seconds a day.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
So
because
full day,
yeah.
just get 1 second.
Because the standard was so high, but also that involves you would do a rehearsal and then a dress rehearsal.
Yeah.
And then you'd do a take and then you'd do another take. I'm just brought up on the way of I get one take and that's it. And that's exciting. I sort of started life as an actor, and I love the idea of you go out on stage, you've got to do it. You can't go off again and say, sorry, can I start again? And I loved that adrenaline. I was a very bad actor, by the way, but which is probably why I turned to animation, because you've got a bit more control and you don't have the stage fright and the nerves. But I think stop motion, you still have adrenaline because it takes all day to do a shot.
You've got to have a lot of patience, I would say, as well.
Interesting. That is the question.
Do you have the patience?
Do you have the patience? Does Tom Daly mind getting wet when he dives? It goes with the job.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. Yeah. It's a very good analogy right there.
It's boring, it's tedious, it's frustrating, but I'll tell you why we do it, what the satisfaction I get from it. I made a film about Gilbert and Sullivan, the team who did many operas in the Victorian period. And in one of the operas, Patience, there's a character who's just read a poem. And she says, well, it seems to me to be nonsense. To which the writer of the poem says, but what precious nonsense. So at the end of the day's shoot, you have to be satisfied that you've created 10 seconds that wasn't there before.
I can fully understand that. I mean, being a filmmaker myself, like even, you know, if you've got a couple of minutes worth of footage that you didn't have the day before, it's an achievement at the end of the day if everything comes out right, even if it's 10 seconds to 10 minutes, I guess. Yeah.
Stop motion, you have to accept that it'll never be the film that's in your head, because even though I said we have a lot of control over a puppet, you should never tell a puppet what to do.
Okay.
That would be wrong. You have to work with the puppet. If he does a gesture and he moves into the shadow, you need to adapt and change. So the puppet, fun enough, is a living, breathing thing, and you do have a relationship with it. With CG,
you don't know what's there, do you?
Well, there's a whole team involved in bringing one character to life. There's the storyboard artists, then there's the people who make the CG armatures, and then there's the animator who will animate the CG skeleton, then somebody will put the fur on it, somebody will put the lighting on it, somebody will put the clothes on it.
Yeah.
And you don't have the whole thing in your hand. Here, I have the whole thing. It's complete, it's coherent, cohesive, and it's one-to-one, and there is a relationship. And he ends up looking like me, and I end up looking like him.
Well, I'd best be off. Ted's filling up some helium balloons for Nikhil's party. I promised to pick them up on my round.
Oh, balloons, how lovely. Wish Nikhil happy birthday from me.
So, I mean, jumping back to the film festivals, the question I've got to ask is, obviously, being a young filmmaker, you were at the time, what was it like being nominated for an Oscar? Because there's a lot of filmmakers that go through I mean, their entire career who can be blockbuster filmmakers or whatever, and they never get an Oscar nomination in their lifetime.
Well, it would have been lovely to have won it, but we didn't.
Even the nomination, though, must have been amazing.
It was exciting. I couldn't enjoy Hollywood as much as, well, I was filming a film at the time, so I had to go straight out there and come straight back.
Right.
And we had a letter from Channel 4 who'd made the film's screenplay that was up for the Oscar. And we showed it to Virgin Airlines, and they said, "Oh yes, you can fly first class." That was lovely. They upgraded us. We tried the same thing coming back, not having won. No, you're back in steerage.
This story is important. Pay attention while I show you young hearts in love, young hearts in pain. This is the story of Takako and Naoki.
The Oscars were very different back then. There's a lot more involved now with Oscars and publicity and stuff. But I have to say I've probably won about 80 awards and 10 Lifetime Achievement Awards, which is absolutely beautiful. But the biggest honour I've ever had was about 8 years ago. I was in Russia. I'd made a film about Tchaikovsky, and I went to his house several times, and we were there on his name day, which is like the birthday but bigger, and people celebrate, and there was a concert, and I was taken to a concert of Tchaikovsky music, and they stopped at one point, and it was this huge orchestra of cadets, and the conductor was all in his fancy uniform and everything, and they said, "We'd like to dedicate this to a friend of Tchaikovsky and a friend of ours." This was in the Tchaikovsky house.
Right.
And that was me. And,
wow.
And the puppet of the Tchaikovsky film is only 14 minutes, but it's quite a moving film about his life. The puppet now stands on the piano on which Tchaikovsky composed The Nutcracker, which to me is sort of one degree of separation from Tchaikovsky, who I've adored since I was 4. And to get, what I love about a lot of my films about Shakespeare, kabuki, opera, Gilbert and Sullivan, Greek tragedy, is I get to learn. I'm 66, I'm still trying to learn something every day, still trying to read a chapter of a book every day or several chapters. I've actually got 6 books going on at the moment, 1 in each room in the house. I think when you lose the appetite for learning or filling the day full of stuff, then it's time to give up, and I'm not giving up yet.
Great, I'd like to hear that.
I've found the subject of the next film that I want to make, whether we'll ever get a budget for it or not. And it's a film that really has my name written on it from a book. And I want to make it. I want to keep going. I should be retiring. I do a lot of theatre work. I do a lot of talks. But I still want to keep making short films. They are harder. COVID, as I said, gave us the opportunity, but it was tough when the crew were geographically split all over the place. That was hard. But I guess it's commonplace now to not have everybody in the same room. But I still have a thirst for knowledge, and I still have a thirst to talk about what I've been through, and do it my way, I think, really.
I like that. So, I mean, a question I'm really down to ask is, as we're coming to the end of the interview, now I've known you for a while now, and I only found out this the other day that you actually worked on The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, which is amazing. That was a major film when I was growing up. I think I rewatched
when you were growing up, it was only 20 years ago.
Oh God, I must have rewatched them films.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even be able to tell you how many times. I mean, what was that like?
My involvement with The Lord of the Rings was quite incidental, but I was asked to go and work on King Kong. I was actually asked by Peter Jackson a few years earlier to go and work on Gollum. This was before the first film had come out. I didn't know in my exactly what Gollum was, and I was terrified of CG motion capture. And I'd just been away from home for 2 years on a film called Hamilton Mattress, and I got this phone call, come to New Zealand, and I said no. Don't ever say no, guys. Don't ever say no. To go and work on Gollum would have been ended. But anyway, they asked me 3 years later to go and work on King Kong on the development stage. They were still unsure whether Kong was going to be animated, fully CG, motion capture. The early decades earlier that had been talk about stop motion. Anyway, I went there. They were still filming Return of the King, and I was the only sort of animator with. I had a storyboard artist, and we were doing storyboards and previews for King Kong. But some of the animators say, "Barry," and they were young animators, fresh from England, fresh from college, and they're saying, "What would happen to a horse when he was killed in this way? How would he roll?" And I'd sort of help. And we were in the same space. And what was lovely is there was an email that would go around and say, "Anybody free to come to the sound studio, come and make some noises, come and do some orc lines." And we had these sessions with the guy who talked to the All Blacks, the Hackers, and we would do these lines that got in the film. And, you know, there would be the cleaner, and there would anybody who was free to come and be a dead person or a ghost or elf or anything. But I did have a line, and it was "Hakuza," something like that. Right. It was all perfectly scripted as a language, and I think it meant "open the gate."
Oh, brilliant! Right. So
it was in. I know where's it's there, but it's in. But so I was sort of tentatively involved whilst we were getting ready for King Kong. I didn't stay for King Kong because I was there for 6-7 months, and they shut King Kong down, the development, while Peter went around the world, and they made the decision to go with motion capture, which is probably the right decision. But it would have been nice to have stayed on for the film. But I can say I had 6-7 months working with Wingnut, Peter Jackson Productions.
I was going to say, that would have been an amazing experience.
And they were wonderful, creative people.
Yeah.
Really good. And what they achieved in their films is extraordinary.
Yeah.
And I was probably way out of my depth, but I do get a nice credit on King Kong. And I think what I can claim is the sequence where Kong is fighting the 3 T-Rexes, and they're all wrapped up in vines and sort of, I thought, wouldn't it be nice to have Kong fighting, not like the original 1933 film, but maybe if they're in slow motion. And I came up with the idea that they were caught in vines and hanging upside down, and Peter eventually ran with that and took it to another level. But I think the vine sequence started with me anyway.
Wow. Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. I mean, the last question, which I'm going to be asking everybody, is if you were stuck on a desert island and you only had 3 TV series you could watch on repeat, what would they be?
Okay. One would be the Diana Rigg Avengers.
Oh, interesting.
From 1960s. One would be the recent Ghosts, which I love, the
Brilliant
sitcom.
Series.
And fun enough, I think Channel 4, one of Channel 4's first outside broadcasts of a live theatre event was Nicholas Nickleby, which ran for 9 hours.
Yes, Ghosts, great series. But so Barry, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming down today to the Film Stooges.
Yeah.
And is there any links or anything you can give anyone to find you online before you go?
Just type my name into YouTube. Most of the films are there.
Brilliant.
And lots of interviews. There's even a strange clip of me animating live with a microphone, looking like Madonna with one of those mics. we don't like animating in front of a public because, well, you have to concentrate really. But no, there's plenty of me waffling on YouTube. And there's a good one called "What is a Puppet?"
Brilliant. Well, thanks guys for tuning in again. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you, the Stooges.
No worries. And I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next week. Remember, like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you soon.